Welcome to the Division of Education, Innovation, and Energy e-learning program. I am Ms. Jamilla Bacchus, facilitator for K Biology, and today we are looking at Unit 2 Biology, Applications of Biology. So, in this topic, in this module, we'll be looking more or less at health. We'll be looking at different aspects of health and disease. And today's topic is looking at immunology. I'll call it Immunology 1 because we have a second part to this, Immunology 2. I am wondering, anybody here does not know what this thing is? Because I think by now, everyone should have seen this around. Yes. COVID-19? Yes, this is the virus which is called the COVID-19 virus. And if we look at it, we are seeing some distinguishing features. And we're seeing to the outside these structures here, which are actually protein coats. They are protein molecules. So this is a virus that is responsible for a lot of the problems and issues that we have going on globally. So you would have heard people speaking about flattening the curve, building immunity, and compromised systems, and a lot of different terms people are using, and a lot of people are trying to explain what exactly is happening with their health. And some are on point, but some are not quite there. So I am hoping that you will gain the knowledge to be able to explain what happens during the process of immunology. So what should you know coming into this program, coming into this lecture? We should know something about health. What is health? What is good health? What is disease? What are some of the categories of disease? And what are pathogenic diseases? So you should have known that prior to this lesson. What we will be doing today, what I would like you to go away from this lesson knowing, is to identify the components of the innate immune system versus the adaptive or acquired immune system, to be able to outline the steps in the inflammatory response, to define opsonization and complement proteins, and to list and describe the main leukocytes found in human blood. We will also like you to be able to draw, label, and annotate the leukocytes present in human blood. And we will also like you to appreciate the many systems and mechanisms at work in protecting the body from illness. Lastly, I would like you to be able to answer CAPE-type exam questions based on this topic. So these are two parts of a question that would be the type of question you will get in a essay type, structure type question. Differentiate between the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system in humans. Differentiate between the innate immune system and the adaptive immune system in humans. Outline the steps involved in the inflammatory response. So the question is, what is immunity? You hear people say, I'm susceptible, or my immune system is low. And, you wonder sometimes, do you actually know what is immunity and how do people gain immunity? So I pulled out these definitions: the state of being immune from or insusceptible to a particular disease or the like. So immunity is the state of being immune or insusceptible to a particular disease. So the disease can no longer affect you. Not that the disease cannot come into your body, but it can no longer affect you and manifest its signs and symptoms within you. Then you are immune to that disease. The condition that permits either natural or acquired resistance to disease. You'll notice I'm using the word acquired and adaptive kind of interchangeably because more or less they speak to the same thing. The ability of a cell to react immunologically in the presence of an antigen, right? So all of these things would speak to what is immunity. Now, you were born with certain things. Sometimes you hear people use the definition, that is innate to him. That is how he is. He can't change. Innate simply means something you have from birth, something you always had with you, right? So when we look at your innate immune system, we are looking at things you were born with, you had from birth. And you have some things that are physical or chemical, and you also have some things that are internal. So some of the things that you have that are physical would be things like right? Some of the things that you have that are physical would be things like your skin. The biggest protection you have is your skin. Your skin covers your entire body. There are just a few areas that are uncovered, where you have your places like your nostril, your mouth, your eyes, your vagina, your anus. Those areas have openings. Other than that, the rest of your body is covered by skin. And that is so important in protecting us. Sometimes you just get a little pin stick you, and that thing would hurt, or you may get it swollen and you may get pus there, and so on and so on. That is just to tell you how important your skin is. Just breaking it a little can actually now be an entry point to pathogens, which can now affect your entire body. Something can enter your body through your finger, but within a short period of time go through your circulatory system and reach to your brain. So your skin is very important in providing a certain amount of immunity or protection against pathogens. You also have things like your tears. Every time you blink, tears actually cover your eyes. So as your eyes are open and substances fall on your conjunctiva, which is the layer that is in contact with the air, these pathogens would land on your eyes. So the fact that tears are constantly bathing your eyes, and there's an enzyme within the tears, lysozyme, that is responsible for killing the pathogens, you will be receiving protection. Likewise, you have your saliva. You also have in your stomach, you have acid. So even in food that you eat, you are being provided with a certain amount of protection. You have your mucus lining in your lungs and in other parts of your body, which trap microorganisms, and so they will not be able to affect you because of the presence of the mucus. So we also have physical things like your hair in your nostrils. Some persons have hair in their ears. You also have wax in your ears. You have things like your cilia, which lines your respiratory tract and so on. Those provide you with a certain amount of protection. Good? And so those are part of your innate immunity, the physical and chemical things that you are born with that provide you with a certain amount of protection. You also have your internal defenses. These are things that you were born with. A little baby would have been born with it. You have your inflammatory response. If something should enter, you get a cut, and some pathogen should enter, it triggers the inflammatory response. I'm sure we all would have experienced that, where you get a cut and within a short period of time, you will realize the area gets swollen, it gets painful, it may, get reddish, and so on. You are experiencing what we call the inflammatory response. That is natural. That is helping to fight against the pathogen. You also have complement proteins. These work in conjunction with the rest of your system to ensure that they fight any invading pathogen. You also have what you call phagocytic cells. So you have cells like your neutrophils and your macrophages, which helps to engulf pathogen and so ensure that we are protected. And then you have the natural killer cells, which themselves will be fighting against pathogen. But interestingly, what they will do is they will kill these invading pathogen and then present them so that the rest of your system will see what they look like, and it will further cause a more developed kind of resistance to the disease. Then we have what we call your adaptive or your acquired immune system. These are the ones, these are more specialized. As we say, this innate immune system, we can use the word non-specific here. So these are non-specific. What does that mean, non-specific? It means that no matter what pathogen comes in, whether it is a virus or a bacteria or a fungus, whatever comes into your system, these things are going to fight against it. These things are going to try to protect you. They are not going to discriminate and say, oh, that's a bacteria, oh, that's a fungus, or that is polio, or that is. They are just, once something is deemed foreign, they are going to attack it, right? Whereas this system here, what we call the acquired immune system or the adaptive immune system, they are said to be specific. And so these will come into play when every time you interact with a pathogen, once the pathogen has been in your system and would have interacted with you in a particular way, these will be activated. So this one, it does not, you are not born with it, so to speak. You develop them. You have more or less the precursors to them. You have the beginnings of what they can become. But these develop as you interact with a pathogen, right? So these two systems, they work together to protect us. You will hear persons say, this here is your first line of defense. So this part here is said to be your first line of defense. While this here would be your second line of defense. Okay, so these here, both the physical and chemical barriers and the internal defenses are said to be a first line of defense. These are the first things that will interact with a pathogen. And they are not specific. Whatever it is, they will seek to destroy it. But the second line of defense, these are more or less the specialists. You know, I tell my students, if you think about fighting war, if you think about the cavalries and the Indians and so on those days, you will have these forts and they will put the non-specialists on the front line. And those are the first ones that will be killed, while the specialists will be behind. The specialists are the ones that are planning the response, planning how you will win the war, so to speak. So if you think of something like that, the specialists, the ones that are specific, those are the ones will only come into play if you have, the attackers coming more into your territory and doing more damage. If you think of that analogy, it may help you. White blood cells, leukocytes. These are, if we recall, we have in your circulatory system, we have red blood cells, which are like these. And we have the white blood cells. Let me just use a different color. Okay, so you have the red blood cells, which we know are responsible for transport of oxygen. So they take an important role in how our body releases energy, while the white blood cells are the ones that are responsible for ensuring our health, ensuring our body is able to respond to diseases and so on. But we have different types of white blood cells. We're just going to look at a few. There are many other categories of white blood cells, but we're going to look at, we're seeing some here. This here, right? And similarly, you see this one here. These are called the neutrophils, right? These are called the neutrophils, and they carry out something called phagocytosis. They are phagocytes. They carry out phagocytosis, and we're going to see that in a little bit. This also carries out phagocytosis. This here is a monocyte. Monocyte, you will know it also as macrophages. The macrophages developed from the monocytes. How you can identify them? The monocytes, you will see they have a type of kind of kidney bean shaped nucleus, right? So these are, and both of these are phagocytes. They carry out phagocytosis in that they engulf their pathogen and they take them in and destroy them. On the other hand, this here, so these would have been your non-specialists. While this one here, if you notice, it is smaller than the others. It's the smallest of your white blood cells, and these are the lymphocytes. These are the specialists. If you notice how you can recognize them, their nucleus takes up most of the cell. Good? And so these are the ones that are going to come into your second line of defense. These are going to be the specialists. These are your lymphocytes. So you see, these are the main white blood cells we're going to be looking at: the phagocytes, the monocytes or macrophages, and also the lymphocytes. For your first line of defense, we will be looking at the phagocytes. But there are some proteins that are involved in that first line of defense. They are called complementary proteins, complement proteins. And as I said, the word complement simply means they add to, they will help, they work along with others to bring about protection. Complement was discovered many years ago as a component of normal plasma that augments the opsonization of bacteria. So they help with the opsonization. Opsonization is a process where the bacteria more or less will be coated. It's like if you throw a seine on a fish or something, so you kind of, you will pull them together and you will coat them so they can't really react. And so it's easy to now collect them and destroy them. So opsonization of bacteria is helped with these proteins called complement proteins by bacteria and allows antibodies to kill some bacteria. All right, so these proteins, they make up a system called the complement system. It is made up of a large number of distinct plasma proteins that react with one another to opsonize pathogen and induce a series of inflammatory responses that help to fight infection. So you're hearing a lot of words here that are being used together. You're hearing opsonization, you're hearing inflammatory response, and you're hearing complement proteins. And all of them are at work in that first line of defense. These are proteins that are found in your blood, and they are working as in a non-specific way. Whenever something foreign comes into your body, they will seek to quell it. Okay? So it is a system of plasma proteins that can be activated directly by pathogens or indirectly by pathogen-bound antibodies. They lead to a cascade of reaction that occurs on the surface of pathogens and generates the active components with various effector functions. And as we mentioned, opsonization. So we said the inflammatory response, complement proteins, and opsonization. These three things work very well within the blood to quell and to bring a pathogen which may be invading under control. Mind you, very often they may not work, they may not be effective based on the amount, the viral load of the pathogen which enters. But they do try to quell an infection. So opsonization is the coating of a particle with proteins, which in turn facilitate phagocytosis of the particle by tissue macrophages and activated dendritic cells. So this inflammatory response. So all of this here basically is talking about what happens during the process of inflammation, the inflammatory response. What happens if something enters? You get a cut and a pathogen enters. What happens? So I'm going to use the diagram to show you, and then I'm going to come back here. So as something enters, you get a cut, and a knife or a nail or something cuts you. and, pathogen will come in. Right on that knife, on the nail, you have sometimes millions of pathogen on the surface, and they come in. These are going to activate, will cause the activation of the blood platelets. These platelets will be attracted to the site because of the release of certain chemicals. And when they're attracted to the site, these in turn will cause these cells called mast cells to gravitate to the area. These mast cells in turn release certain chemical substances called histamine. Right? So I know you all would have heard of antihistamine medication and so on for people who have allergies and so on. Yes, sometimes certain allergens can cause these mast cells to be activated in persons. So these mast cells, they would gravitate to the area, they will release histamine, and the histamine flows in the blood. What this will now cause is that this blood vessel will now become more permeable, and it would allow some of the fluid and the white blood cells, the phagocytes within them, to leave the capillary and go into the tissue itself, right? Because normally these tissues here, it will be functioning and the capillaries will be passing through. But now with the presence of the histamine in the blood, you will now have this capillary more permeable. Now that these go in, some of these are going to try to engulf the pathogen through the process called phagocytosis. You would also have some larger white blood cell called macrophages. As we said earlier, I showed you the macrophages, which has this kind of kidney bean shape nucleus. These also will gravitate to the area. They will engulf some of the pathogen, as we can see here, and they will also release certain chemicals called cytokines, and these in turn, what these will cause is that more red blood cell would gravitate to the area. So when you see that redness, when you see that increased redness in the area, it's because of an increased amount of red blood cells in the area. The area gets very hot because you have a lot of metabolic activity taking place there, and a lot of heat is being given off. And so all of the signs that you would have experienced, the increased water in the area becomes, swollen and hard sometimes because increased water gets in from the capillaries into the area. You would see the redness because of increased red blood cells in the area. You will get pain because of the way in which these things affect the area. And so this here is what we call the inflammatory response. Now what it is doing, it is actually going to work to get rid of some of the pathogen. Sometimes this may be sufficient and this may quell the infection, but there are times when it may not be sufficient, and then you may have to have the other response, which is the specific response or the acquired response. So let's go back to here where we see the inflammatory response. As we said, one of the signal is histamine. It is stored in the mast cells. It triggers the nearby blood vessel to dilate and become more permeable. The activated macrophage release additional signals to further promote blood flow to the injured site. This increase in local blood supply causes the redness and heat that is associated with normal inflammation. The enhanced blood flow to the injury site delivers antimicrobial proteins. Activated complement proteins promote further release of histamine and help attract phagocytes. Phagocytosis occurs. It involves the uptake of pathogen by the phagocytes. The end result is an accumulation of pus, a fluid rich in white blood cells, dead pathogens, and cell debris. So when you see pus in an area, it means that there was an infection, there was an invasion of pathogen, and these pathogen would have been, taken up by your phagocytes. So it means your phagocytes were working. They also would mean that some of them were killed, right? But it is a sign that your body is trying to respond to the infection, and hopefully it will be quelled in a short period of time. So this shows you phagocytosis, that process that is taking place in the neutrophils and the macrophages, where you see a pathogen, right? And this here is the white blood cell, the phagocytes, which could be the macrophage or the neutrophil. And this now, when it reaches here, when the pathogen reaches here, you will have certain things on its structure called antigen, which may allow it to be recognized by the phagocyte. They will then take them in through a process called phagocytosis. So if I can just draw to help a bit. So let's say this is a white blood cell, right? This is, let's say this is a neutrophil, right? And you have a bacteria come there. This structure, you see, just as how you have jello, because white blood cells do not have a fixed shape. They are not like red blood cells. Red blood cells are, they have a disc shape. White blood cells can change their shape. Just as how jello can, change its shape, the white blood cells can move their cytoplasm around. And so you can have this occurring where you went from this cell with its whole structure. What you see now is the cytoplasm through its false arm moving around. So eventually what happens is you get this structure where so this structure is inside of here. So this becomes this, right? This is the nucleus here. So this becomes this, and as you can see here, this is what is happening. What happens eventually is that you may have a lysosome which may attach itself to this structure, and so it will bring certain hydrolytic enzymes and so on, which will now flow into here and break down whatever the pathogen was that was invading, and it will kill it. So this cell eventually may kill the pathogen. But in turn, the pathogen, if it's a bacteria, it's not defenseless. It may have its own toxins, and so it may let out and also kill the white blood cells. So in turn, you may have both the pathogen and the white blood cell being destroyed. Good, but the fact is this cell has now literally sacrificed its life to get rid of the pathogen. So in this way, we will be having the system working. Again, this is showing us again in a different way, the same process we just spoke of. There are certain proteins that are present which will seek to be markers, and eventually these cells, as we can see, what they can do, they can present pieces of the pathogen out. And so if it is that you have to have the second line of defense, this is where you have the transition occurring, where the pathogen that was taken in is now being used as a marker to identify what it is, what its antigen structure is, and that would allow your white blood cell, your T cell, to be able to identify it. So in turn, you will have the development of what we call the adaptive response or the acquired immunity developing. This, however, can take several weeks. And so in the next lesson, we're going to go into that to see how this adaptive response develops. Okay, what are antigens? We have been using the word pathogen and antigen continuously. Antigens are generally proteins, but they can be lipids, carbohydrate, or nucleic acid. Antigens can be found on the surface there are three types, so they can be foreign bodies. So they can be found on the surface of pathogen. A pathogen is a disease-causing organism. Good? Pathogens are normally microscopic, but you do have some large pathogens. A pathogen is anything that causes disease. Right? A bacteria, remember, may be a pathogen, but not all bacteria are pathogen. Right? If it's a disease-causing organism, it is a pathogen. And on the surface of pathogen, on the surface of all cells, you have structures, proteins, which identifies that cell. And those structures are known as antigen structures. And based on the makeup of those proteins, they can impact on how your body is going to respond to it, whether they're going to accept it or whether they're going to reject it and seek to attack it. And so we will look at things like tissue transplants and so on, how that could generate an immune response. Good? So antigens are protein structures, mainly proteins, which are found on the surface of cells and the surface of different pathogens, but they can also be just proteins that are just in the atmosphere. They don't have to be actually on a pathogen, right? So I just want, this is going into the next section, but I just want you to appreciate that eventually we will have the adaptive response where these B and T cells having their specific receptor molecules able to identify the particular antigen structure. And so this is eventually going to result in the acquired response. Good? So, differentiate between the innate immune response, the innate immune system, and the adaptive immune system. If we go back, we see the innate immune system would be those things that are the things that we are born with, and you can list them, the physical things and the chemical structures that we are born with. Example, hair, cilia, skin, chemicals in your mucus or in your hydrochloric acid in your stomach, tears, saliva, while the adaptive immune system would be those things that are developed as the pathogen comes into your body. So you're looking at the B and T lymphocytes, and these eventually will allow your body to be able to adapt to or to be able to respond to an infection. Outline the steps involved in the inflammatory response. Again, you should be able to go back and go through what happens first, what happens next. I want you to sit and go through what are the steps involved in the inflammatory response. Why is it that the area becomes swollen? Why is it the area becomes red? Why is it the area becomes hot? Okay? I need for you to sit and just go through it. It's very easy, but you need to be able to speak to exactly what is happening and why is this happening. Why is it red? Why is it swollen? Why is it is it hot? Okay, so these things, these questions, based on what we would have done today, you should have been able to answer that. And any questions related to the innate immunity that we would have seen. Identify, so we started off asking for you to be able to identify the components of the innate immune system versus the adaptive immune system. Outline the steps in the inflammatory response. Define opsonization and complement proteins. Again, these, if you go online and check, there's a lot of information on that. It's not too important that you go too deep into it, but you need to have a general appreciation of how these things work together to give you that. Remember, they are part of the innate response. They are part of the innate response that is happening in your blood. So the innate response includes the physical, the chemical, or the things that are happening in the blood. List and describe the main leukocytes found in the human blood. So we would have looked at the phagocytes, including the neutrophils and the macrophages, and we would have also looked at the lymphocytes, which are part of the acquired immunity. I want you to be able to draw, label, and annotate. So we looked at these cells. I want you to sit and draw. Look and draw them in terms of their sizes. If we do a scale drawing, we will recognize that the lymphocytes are the smallest. Their nucleus takes up most of their cell. Next comes the neutrophils. They have a lobed nucleus. And next comes the monocytes or macrophages. They have the kidney bean-shaped nucleus. They are the largest of the white blood cells. Appreciate the many systems and mechanisms that work in protecting the body from illnesses. So you're looking at all of these systems, how they're working together. When we interact with pathogens, as we always do, we are always interacting with pathogens. Pathogens are all around us. They are in our body, they are on surfaces, in the foods we eat and so on. We can't get away from them. But our body has to work, and our body has the mechanisms to be able to work to protect us from it. So in our next lesson, we are going to be developing on this and looking at the adaptive response, where we are looking to see how the B and the T lymphocytes work to bring about acquired immunity. I'm Ms. Jamilla, I'm in Bacchus. Thank you so much for viewing.